Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of parables that are typically, people would assume that on face value that those parables are talking about a common dialogue in our society today, equity versus equality, but they're actually talking about something completely different, and we'll kind of break that down here. But the two parables I'm thinking about are, uh, we're going with the versions that are in Matthew's gospel, because Matthew, I was reminded in yesterday's sermon, came from a background of being a tax collector. A group of people that were not particularly liked by most of society, because these were the kind of, we'll just say that they were opportunists that went for opportunity to make money. And so I find it very interesting. One of these parables is only recorded in Matthew's gospel account, and the other is recorded in a number of other sources, but Matthew's unique take on it is interesting. So, first one would be the parable of the talents. Brief synopsis of the story. Master of a lot of resources is going away on a long journey, so he entrusts a certain amount of his estate to 3 of his servants. Now, because it uses the word servant here, we know that these were like people that were regularly employed that had already been serving the master for some time. So he knew their work style, he knew their work ethic per se, and he distributed the resources accordingly. So to one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2 talents, and to another he gave 1 talent. This is as recorded in Matthew chapter 25. Okay, and he goes away. By the way, talent here, there's some matter of opinion or just difference of how much it actually was worth, but a good general estimate is that this would be the equivalent of 15 to 20 years worth of a living wage. So one guy basically got 5 times 20, or 100 years worth of a person's living wage. Another person got 2 times that, or 40 years worth, still plenty. And one got one equivalent there of 15 to 20 years worth of wages. So a lot of money in any case. And anyway, the master returns, comes back, and the one that had 5, obviously the master had given the one 5 because he had seen that, hey, here's a real go-getter, we'll give him 5 and we'll probably see something from this. Well, he did. He had increased it to 5 more, so he had doubled the investment. The second that was given 2, he came back with 4 total, and so he had doubled the investment as well. You get to the last guy, and he said, hey, I knew that you were a harsh master who's reaping where you didn't sow. In other words, you didn't do all this, and so you were just kind of making life rough on us as we had to think about how to make something out of your money. Well, I was scared, so I just made sure it was as safe as possible so I didn't lose what was yours. So he buries it in the ground. Now, you think, buried in the ground? Honestly, according to the law of those people, that was actually a consideration for what was the safest place for keeping something of monetary value or something like that, would be to bury it in the ground, because then a person has a whole world around them to try to figure out where you buried it. Now, if you forget where you bury it, that makes quite the start for a lot of comedy stories in our day. But anyway, long story short, he had done what was considered the safest conservative thing to do, which was protect what had been entrusted to him. Now, one would say, okay, they were given different amounts, but if you wanted to really be fair, the one that was, kind of skeptical or trepidatious about it, he probably should have been given the 5, and the one that was a real go-getter, well, since he already has the ability, he should have just been given 1. Well, from a business standpoint of it, if you look at the master, okay, if he'd have given the go-getter 1 talent and he'd have doubled that talent, he'd have had 2 talents, okay? The middle guy would have still gotten 2, so that would have been 4, okay? So we're up to 6, all right? 6. Can't count with one hand and one hand holding the camera. But, so that would have been 6, and then the one that had 5, he would have still just saved the 5. Now, you might make an argument that, he might have been encouraged by the 5 and gone on and made something of it. But let's just assume the outcome ended up being the same if they were given the different amounts. Now he's come back with just 5. Okay, so the master comes back and he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then plus 5 is 11. Now, by turning the tide and doing it the other way, where the go-getter had 5 and doubled it, becoming 10, the middle had 2, becoming 4, making that total 14, and now one more, 5. The master is coming out better, okay? So just economically, from a business standpoint, the master was trying to do what was best for his. However, that's not the point of the parable at all. The point of a parable is generally to teach one specific lesson. Now, we come up with a lot of analogies and allegories off of it, but the key point in this, you may have to look around at some of the supporting stories and parables if the explanation is not given. So, in the case of the parable of these talents, it's actually set in the context of Matthew chapter 25, where the passage before it is the passage about the ladies that are waiting for the bridegroom, okay, with their lamps of oil. A lot of children's Sunday school songs come from this. Give me oil in my lamp, all of that sort of thing. And their parable there is about being prepared because you don't know when the master's coming, when the bridegroom is coming in their case. The second parable, which is the parable of the talents, is be careful because you don't know when the master is coming back. Okay, so in this case, the message of the first of those parables is be prepared because you don't know when the time is, when the end is near, when it is all up. Okay, the second parable, the message there is it's not a warrant or a license for you to do nothing and to rest on your laurels. It is not the time to be conservative and try to just save what you have been given. It's the time to invest it and get out there and do something and make an impact for that kingdom so that you will have something to show for your life whenever the master returns. So, there, it's not really about equity, equality, or any of those sorts of things. We can get a glimpse into what the working life was for people of that time period a little bit contextually, but the point of the message is being prepared, because you don't know what time a reckoning will be required. Now, the other parable I was going to talk about is Matthew 20. Okay, this one is a real head scratcher for folks. It's called the parable of the workers in the field, or the workers in the vineyard. So at the beginning of the working day, the master of a field goes out and looks for laborers to work in his field. Okay? And he agrees with some men that he says, okay, if you go out, work in my vineyards and field, at the end of the day, I will pay you a day's wage. Okay? They agree to a contract. Okay? They have an agreement between them that you do this, you will get this. Okay? Every few hours or so after that, they go back by the marketplace, must have had a bumper crop or something, and they go checking for more workers. Well, when they go by and check, each time they find a few more folks that still haven't been hired by anybody. But each time, the hiring person says, go work in my field, and when the day is done, I will pay you whatever is right. Okay? And he does this all along until it gets down to where there's only 1 hour left in the working day. And says the same thing. Go work in my field. When quitting time comes, I'll pay you whatever's right. So then he lines them up, starting with the ones that were hired most recently to the ones that were hired earliest, who have been working all day. Okay? So they're all lined up, and the master basically gives them their pay in the sight of the others. Okay? So they pay the guys that have been there at 1 hour, and they give them a full day's wage. Okay? At that point, the wheels start turning for the guys that have worked all day, and they're like, oh, these guys only been 1 hour. They got paid the whole... What's going to happen when it gets to us? Okay? I guess it's a day's wage an hour, is maybe the way they're thinking. Okay? But then, as it goes down the line, I imagine those hopes start to fade a little bit, because they notice as he gets to each person, he pays them the same wage. Okay? He pays them each a day's wage in the sight of everybody. So when it gets down to the last one, they're given a day's wage as well. Well, everybody else, except for the ones that had a contract, are the ones that they were just told, I will pay you whatever's right. They take their money, they go on. Okay? The ones that were hired first, that had agreed to, okay, we'll work in your vineyards, and we expect a day's wage for that. When it comes down to it, they are upset, because they think, here we are, we've gone through all the hot of the day. Not to mention that there were some that were only a few hours shorter than they were, that still got the same as everyone else. But we've borne the heat of the day, and we've only gotten a day's wage. Well, the master's like, excuse me? Didn't you agree to this? Didn't you agree to a day's wage for a day's work? What matter is it to you what I decide to do with the rest of my money in terms of paying folks that work for me? In other words, he tells them a big cold none ya. It's none your business. Okay? Well, you would say, well, okay, this is troubling, because it strikes in a area for us where we feel, well, that's not fair, which is a lot of what the equity equality discussion is about. Fairness and justice, and all these terms bandied about. And even though you don't perceive it, you may have been given a leg up that someone else wasn't given, and such, and thus and so, and all of these sorts of things. Well, unfortunately, that's not what the parable is about. When he starts the parable, he says it this way. Let me pull it so that I'm not like making this up. But he tells us what the parable is as he starts. He says, for the kingdom of heaven is like. In other words, he says, this is basically what the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, as it's sometimes translated, is like unto. The people that had a contract, or rather, a better word would be covenant with God, were the Hebrew people that became Israel, okay, that became his nation, all right? They were supposed to be this special, unique, peculiar people that would be a blessing and a light for all of the world, okay? And it's true in one sense because of the fact that Jesus did come through that nation to be a light to the rest of the world. However, if they think that that means that there's some extra special place as far as privilege within being a part of the kingdom of God, that's where it's incorrect, because all of us that come to Christ in faith are citizens of the kingdom, of children of God, based on our relationship with Christ, not on the basis of some contractual agreement. In other words, he has said, you know what? Come and I will pay you whatever is right. He has given basically an equal outcome to all of those that would come to him in faith and believe. Now, like, okay, but what do we do about all the injustice and everything within this world? Well, I hate to tell you, I don't have any answers, plans, or otherwise for you, but I can tell you this. If we think that we are going to solve it all and we're going to make some kind of ideal utopia, workers' paradise, whatever you want to call it, we're fooling ourselves. We'll take, for example, what was considered the wisest of men from antiquity, King Solomon. Okay, the book of Ecclesiastes is supposedly and purported to be a collection of the wisdom and his pursuit of wisdom and knowledge and understanding. And he tries out a bunch of things, probably tries more different economic philosophies and ways of life than we could imagine. And in Ecclesiastes 9:11, interestingly enough, 9:11, he comes up with this. He says, "Again, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, or bread to the wise, or riches to the discerning, or favor to the skillful. Rather, time and chance happen to all of them." So, ultimately, he says, you know what? The fastest runner is not always the one that wins the race. And I can tell you from ultra running, that is definitely true. There are all kinds of circumstances that can change the outcome of a foot race or a running race, especially if you put it on trails instead of nice, evenly groomed roads, okay? The battle's not always to the strong. Resources or bread not always to the wise. Riches are not always to the discerning. Favor is not always given to the skillful. Okay? In other words, what he's saying is that if you want to make a world where it's just deterministic that, okay, you're the smartest, you're automatically going to come out on top, it's not going to happen. That's not the way of the nature of this world. Now, whether that nature is because of how it is polluted by sin and sinfulness and people choosing their own way instead of God's, okay, or whether it's just that way, that's just the way that nature is, ultimately, it's the reality that we live in. that it's not automatically going to be one way or another. And so when we look at this, ultimately, sure, we should want to end prejudice, discrimination, and such, but there still should be existence of where a person's abilities should be able to help them to succeed. Okay, we should not kill the impetus for success while trying to maintain some sense of fairness or bring about a sense of fairness. However, we're not going to achieve that either through just making sure that everybody comes out with the same result. And I think Solomon points to that, is that, it's not always the one that we would expect always be the winner. Anyway, gone on for a little too long, but until next time.